right, so can you guys imagine your life without boxes? Like, say if a box or a container had never been invented. Can you imagine what life would be like? Like, one of the things I do most mornings is I have a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios. Now, it wouldn't be possible for me to eat Honey Nut Cheerios unless there was some kind of container or box, or they would blend in with the Total or the Fruit Loops or the Fruity Pebbles or whatever it is that the kids have. We need boxes. Has anyone ever moved before? Okay, so if you've moved before, which you have, could you imagine moving without boxes? Like, it'd be impossible. You'd just have to carry things like one at a time. So boxes can serve a very functional purpose. We cannot imagine a world without boxes. Now, boxes are very useful for things. When it comes to people, boxes are not very useful at all. You've been probably heard the phrase before. Put in a box. I mean, have you ever felt like you've been put in a box before? Maybe another way to think about it is, have you felt you've been labeled by somebody? Kierkegaard said, "When you label me, you negate me." So the minute that we're labeled, the minute that we're put in a box, is the minute that we really lose part of our humanity. Now think about this, just in your life. I want you to think about this. Has anyone ever said to you, or has anybody ever implied, you're not the right gender. We're looking for a man to do this job. Or has anyone ever told you that you're too young? We're looking for someone with more experience. Or has anyone ever said you're too old? We're looking for somebody who is younger and more energetic. Has anyone ever said to you or implied to you that you're a failure, that you're not good enough, that you're not cool enough, that you're too fat, that you're too poor? Many of us have heard many of these things, and we agree that once somebody labels us, they negate us. Once we're placed in a box, part of our humanity is taken away from us. Now, yesterday I was at 4:30 in the afternoon. We were at a baseball game at Anderson Field in Millard, and this is a first grade baseball game, so it's more cute than it is competitive. But the kids get up, and basically if the kid hits the ball, the kid's going to get to first base, and if they get to first base, it's a pretty good chance they're going to score. The 7-year-olds have not mastered defense at this point in their baseball development. But really the way that kids get out is they strike out. That's really the way that you're not going to score your maximum runs, and let the other kids come and take their turn batting. And there was one kid from the other team, and he got up the first time, and he just kind of held the bat awkward, and his hands didn't just seem like they were leveraged quite right. And got up to swing, and he swung, and he missed. And he watched one pass him by, and it was a strike, and they called it. And he tried to swing again, and he struck out. So he goes and sits down, and he had a really interesting last name on the back of his jersey. So I noticed when he was up again, he struck out again the second time. Now by this time, probably all the kids have at least gotten one hit, or maybe hit a foul ball or something like that. And it was his third at bat, probably the fifth or sixth inning. The time was running out, and I think everybody there was probably pulling for this kid that he'd get a hit. And it was so cool to see him standing up there trying. And he swung and he missed, and he swung and he missed again. The third time he got up and he struck out again. Now, do you think that kid was put in a box or labeled by some of his teammates? Do you think that kid was labeled or put in a box by himself? The kid who strikes out 3 times, the kid who fails 3 times. And one of the things I hope that this kid knows is whether, he just hasn't practiced very much, whether his motor skills just aren't quite developed yet as a, heaven forbid, a 6 or a 7-year-old. I hope he understands that he's not a failure in all areas of life. I hope he knows that just yesterday, for some reason or another, he didn't get a hit. And just because he fails in one area of life doesn't mean that he's going to fail in every area of life. Just because he didn't get a hit on one day doesn't mean that he's not going to get hit another day. But I want you to think about that. Other people may have said, well, you struck out again, He may have thought, I can't hit this ball. I'm trying, but I just can't do it. So I wonder how many of us, we've been put in a box by other people, but I wonder how many of us also put ourselves in a box. Like, I've tried to do this. I've tried really hard. I've tried many times, and I'm never going to get it. Or, I've started this. I was doing well for a couple weeks, and I just go back to my old habits, and I can't change. I can't grow. I'm in this box, and when we find ourselves in this box, we're trapped. We've lost part of our humanity, and then what happens is fear is going to keep us in our box. Fear will keep us in our box, and what happens then is that we sacrifice like growth and progress at the altar of safety and security. Now, boxes, they work well for things. Boxes fail when it comes to people like me and you. In boxes, when it comes to defining Christ, there is no box that will do. Absolutely, there's no box that will do as we look at defining who Christ is. So Jesus had his Palestinian contemporaries, and they tried to place him in a box. The people in biblical times, they tried to give Jesus certain labels and say that he was just a certain thing. They tried to say that he was a revolutionary. Oh, this guy, he's just a revolutionary. He's a radical. Well, when they asked Jesus if he should pay taxes, he said, yeah, you need to give Caesar what is Caesar's. And it turned out that he wasn't a revolutionary at all. They tried to say, well, he's just a carpenter. He works with a hammer and nails and wood. But then Jesus, he confronted and he confounded the scholars and let them scratch in their hair. They said that Jesus was just a Jew. But if you look at who Jesus attracted, he attracted the Gentiles and he attracted the Greeks. He blew that box right out of the air. They said that he was a rabbi, but Jesus gave up on the temple and he gave up on the synagogue. They said that he was just a holy man. But this holy man, he hung out in the street corners with the lepers and the prostitutes and the women and the hurting people. They said that he talked like a king, but if you look at Jesus' life, he primarily lived as a pilgrim. So the Palestinian contemporaries, they tried to put Jesus in a box, and it just didn't work. Because Jesus, he exploded every single box they tried to put him in. Now, we try to do this today as well. Like theologians, they try to put Jesus in a box. The box here, we call it doctrine. We believe this about God. We believe that this isn't true about God. Therefore, we pretty much understand God. We don't pretty much understand God. It's like an insect. Theology is basically like an insect studying a human being. They can get so far, but they can get no further. We might be flattered that they're trying. But we can never we hear many times that our faith is a mystery. Politicians, I don't know, maybe I just am weird, but do you guys ever get calls between 7 and 9 o'clock at night from everybody running from governor and state senator? And one of the things that politicians will try to do, and if there's any politicians here, I'm sure this isn't you, but it's just all the rest of them. They try to put Jesus in a box. Well, Jesus would vote green, or Jesus would want lower taxes, or Jesus would believe. And I'm glad these people have figured out what Jesus believes about these issues. Preachers, I'm going to take some blame on this one as well. We sometimes try to put God in a box. I just challenge, watch some cable access channel at midnight, and you're going to hear a preacher trying to put God in a box. If you pray this prayer and if you give this donation, not only are we going to send you this book, but your life is going to be full of prosperity. We've put God in this box. Now, I think for many of us, the box that we try to put God in is a little bit different. I think for many of us, what we try to do is we try to fit the image of God. We try to fit who God is into who we want God to be, rather than who actually God is. We try to think, okay, maybe God is this, and I want God to be this person. I don't want that, but I do want that. And it's kind of like this. We want a fair God. We want to see justice served throughout the world, but we also want this God to give grace. We want a God who does not let bad things happen, but we also want a God who gives us complete freedom. We want a God who offers forgiveness for us, but like justice for everybody else. We want like this God of all things to be all powerful, but we still want to totally understand this God. So many of us have put God into one box or another. We create God into the image of who we think God should be. Now, this isn't new. Peter did this, James did this, and John did this. They had put Jesus into a box. They said, okay, well, Jesus, he's a good teacher. They said that Jesus is a healer, that Jesus is a miracle worker, that Jesus is compassionate because he hangs out with the marginalized. They said that Jesus is a nice guy because he listens to us. They had plenty of boxes for Jesus. And none of these were necessarily bad boxes, but Jesus just knew that there's an implication of limiting God to a certain attribute or a certain set of attributes. So Jesus says, okay, Peter and James and John, you guys are going to come with me. We're going to go and hike up this mountain, and I'm going to show you something. Now, here's the implication for all of us before we start with the text. The implication for us is that I think many of us have a God who is simply too small. I think we go to this God when we need this God. I think that sometimes this God is a God of convenience. I think that we try to do as much as we can, and then we invite God to join the process when we can go no further. I think if we're flying a plane, God's just the co-pilot until we need him to take over. Now, this story is an incredible story. It starts in Matthew chapter 17, verse 1. So the Bible says, 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and the two brothers, James and John, and led them up a high mountain to be alone. Now, immediately, the Hebrew reader is going to know that Jesus has taken these three guys up to a mountain. And some of the great things that God has ever done has happened on the top of a mountain. You guys have heard the phrase before, a mountaintop experience. That's always a good experience. It's something great that happens. And God has used mountains to do incredible things. It was at the top of Mount Moriah that Abraham was prepared to sacrifice Isaac. It was at the top of Mount Sinai where Moses saw the burning bush. Elijah was ascended into heaven at the top of Mount Horeb. Jesus redeemed all of humanity at the top of this hill called Calvary. And today we see Jesus busting through any boxes at the top of Mount Hermon. Now, this mountain is 9,200 feet. It's in the northern part of Israel. One of the really cool things about this mountain, it's 100 miles away from the Dead Sea. Yet from the Dead Sea, you can see the top of this mountain. Now, in the Dead Sea, there's nothing coming out, there's nothing going in. And I just want to say, if any of you feel like today that the Dead Sea is where you live, that you're just in a place and there's nothing coming in, there's nothing going out, you're just stuck, I want to let you know that you can see the top of this mountain. And that at the top of this mountain, Jesus is there. And at the top of this mountain, Jesus is going to do this incredible thing. You can see it from that far away. Now, this happened to me in the spring of 1998. It was about 960 feet above sea level in this little town called Atlanta, Georgia. So I was a seminary student at Emory University. At Emory University, it's one of the best seminaries in the world. It's got the largest theological library in the world. Some of the great theologians are professors there. And for about a year and a half of my seminary experience, God was up here. I love to hang out at this library. I love to read these books. I love to listen to the teachers. But it was a Saturday morning. I was a youth minister in a church part-time, and we were taking the kids downtown. Now, this is something that gave me a lot of worry. It gave me a lot of fear. It gave me a lot of anxiety. I did not like downtown Atlanta. It was a little bit different from the farm I grew up in northwest Iowa. The people acted a little bit different. It was just a weird environment for me, but the kids wanted to do it. And, so we had this thing planned. There's going to be 16 kids and 4 adults. And, I don't know if you're here, Chad, or not, but you probably had those mornings where 7 kids and no adults show up. And that was one of those mornings, and I'm driving this 15-passenger van down Interstate 75, and we finally get to this church on a Saturday morning, and it was the day that the box was just blown up. I walked into this church. It was a Vineyard church. Never been in a Vineyard church before. It was a converted warehouse, just this eclectic group of people. There's going to be a worship service, and then we're going to go out and feed the people that lived in the housing projects that just surrounded this warehouse turned sanctuary. And if you think our worship services are long, you would never complain again after going to this place. It was like 2 hours. They sang, and then they prayed, and then they sang some more. Then they read the Bible, and they sang some more. Then the guy talked, and they prayed some more. Then they took an offering, and they sang some more, and they prayed some more. And I don't know what in the world happened, but in those 2 hours, it changed. All of a sudden, Christianity went from up here to right here. We got out there, and I could not get out to these places fast enough, and we were out there, it was just natural and easy and right to give food to these people. I was praying for these people that just 4 hours before I was so afraid of. And I've never looked back. That was a day that totally changed my life. God just did something on that day. Now, the first song that you guys heard as you were walking in today is called "Today Is the Day." And I just want you to know that today can be your day. You may have come to church and it's a beautiful day outside, and you're thinking, okay, I'll go and I'll leave. And I want you to know that today can be your day. Maybe the faith, it's up here, and all of a sudden you realize that there's people who are hurting in your schools. You say that there's something more important than my fears of sharing my faith. So today is the day that God becomes bigger than any of the fears that I have. There may be a dream that you've just been putting off, and a goal that for one reason or another you just haven't made any progress for, and today can be the day where God's goodness can be much larger than your anxieties. Today can be the day where no longer Christianity is not just something that is an individual experience, but today can be that day where you see just so much pain. And you know that you can listen. You know that you can pray. You know that you can serve. You know that you can love. You know that you can help. Today can be your day. Now, I want to go to verse 2. As the men watched, so here you have Peter, James, and John. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed so that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Now, what's really interesting here is that Matthew goes no further. Matthew gives no additional detail. He doesn't, spend a whole chapter trying to say what Jesus looked like, because he can't. It's like me. I've been to the fjords in Norway before. By far, the most beautiful place in the world that I've ever experienced. There may be more beautiful places. I've never seen them. For me to try to explain what these fjords look like to you, I can't do it. I'm not even going to try. You have to see them for yourself. And that's what Matthew is doing here. He just says Jesus' face, it was transformed so that it was like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. So here was Jesus, this guy who ate Mediterranean food and talked with a Galilean accent, and all of a sudden he is transfigured into this cosmic vision of light. Now, there is, at this single moment, Peter and James and John, this was a cool moment for them. Because at this moment, they began to realize who they were, and they began to realize who God was. All of a sudden, they felt like a mosquito on an elephant. And for them, that was a very good thing. Now, in verse 3, Matthew continues, "Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking to Jesus." Now, historically speaking, for us in the United States, this would be like one of us being transfigured, then all of a sudden, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, come and start speaking to you. This is the Hebrew Hall of Fame. Now, what's really funny here is in verse 4. I'm not sure when Jessica read this or not, if you caught this or not, but Peter. We've talked about Peter a lot. A lot of times I'll give Peter a hard time. I mean, he kind of turns out great, but Peter's one of those guys. Do you ever know anyone? Sometimes they just say something, and you're thinking, why would you say that? I mean, one of my favorite quotes is, it's better to remain silent and thought to be a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. So that's what Peter's story is here. Like, Peter actually speaks. And in verse 4, Peter exclaimed, "Lord, it's wonderful for us to be here." Now, that's a very odd thing to say. Like, Peter is like seeing Jesus transfigured, like he's white, his face like the sun, and Peter, like, he's very polite about this, like, "Lord, it's wonderful for us to be here. If you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Now, to you, this probably seems like a pretty harmless idea. Okay, Peter's thinking, okay, this is really cool. Like, Jesus is, white clothes all of a sudden. His face shines like the sun. You got Elijah and Moses over here. These guys have been dead for centuries. And we're going to make a couple statues, or 3 statues, to commemorate this. Now, statues are cool. I love statues. I love, like, memorials. Like, I can't go by one without reading, like, who this person was or what happened in this specific place. And maybe we can't blame Peter for this, but as Peter was offering to head up the building committee, God just had enough. He didn't even... You ever been interrupted by someone before? That's what God did to Peter. He's like, "Peter, you're done." So God spoke in verse 5. "But even as he spoke, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And a voice from the cloud said, 'This is my dearly loved son, who brings me great joy. Listen to him.'" Now, here the word love, it's not the typical word agape or even its cousin phileo. This word is a different word. When this word is used in the context of Matthew 17, the word loved, it really means priceless. It means unique. It means one of a kind, never to be repeated again. So when when Peter hears this, he's like, okay, he's actually saying that, like, Jesus is just one. Like, he's different than Elijah, and he's different than Moses, and he's the first and the last. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the never to be again. And Peter realized that, like, I've totally missed the point. I had Jesus in a box before. It was teacher, it was healer, it was miracle worker, it was good man, it was compassionate person, and now I put him in a little bit different box. This box is a good box. He's in the same box with Moses, who was the steward of the law. He's in the same box with Elijah, who was the teacher of the prophets. But Peter's thinking to himself, I should never even have had this guy in the box in the first place. Now, can you imagine, like, seeing God face to face like Peter saw him? Can you imagine hearing the voice of God? Just saying those words, "This is my dearly loved son who brings me great joy. Listen to him." Now, this mountaintop experience was about blowing up boxes. And in verse 6, it continues, "The disciples were terrified." Okay, so we've been talking about fear for the last couple weeks, and we got a couple more weeks to go. This is where the fear comes in. Now, it doesn't just say they were afraid. This is like afraid on steroids. It says the disciples were terrified, and they fell face down on the ground. Now, yesterday at the Ministry Center on Saturday morning, we had a guest speaker that came and spoke to the men of the church. Ty Schenzel, he's spoken here before. He'll speak here again. He's the founder and director of the Hope Center for Kids in North Omaha. And I'd never heard him tell this story before. He told us a story about the day that changed his life. He told the story about his mountaintop experience. He told the story about, and I forget whether he was in Alabama or Georgia. He actually made a joke and said it was basically the same state, but he was in one of these 2 areas, and basically he was at this big worship experience where basically everybody there was African American. He said, there's a handful of Caucasian people who were there, and he was one of them, and they were at this prayer meeting, and they were talking, they were praying, and all of a sudden, like, he felt God nudging him to get out of his chair and just lay face down on the ground. And like he said, he kind of joked around about it. Well, I heard God saying this, and he kind of moved around a little bit, and he's going to do it, and he decided not to because, like, he didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but God was telling him to do it, and then he did it again. He got partway down, and got back up, and then he said, I just found myself laying on the ground, face down, worshiping God. among all these African American people. And it was really that day that the Hope Center for Kids was born. Just another ordinary man being encountered by an extraordinary God who does great things on the top of mountains. Now, we have to know here the disciples, they were terrified, they were fearful, they were immobilized. But they discovered something that they would never forget. And this is something that I hope that all of us can never forget. They discovered that God is bigger than any box. They discovered that God is bigger than any container. They discovered that God is bigger than any person. They discovered that God is bigger than any church. They discovered that God is bigger than anything and everything. And this packageable, portable Jesus that might fit well on a painting or in our purse or on the pages of a book. This Jesus does absolutely nothing for our fears. The small view of God that many of us have, it generates very little courage. When Christ is great, listen to this, when Christ is great in our lives, then fears become small. As our awe of Jesus expand, what happens is that the fears of life diminish. Now, verse 7 is one of my probably favorite 2 or 3 verses in all the Bible. I haven't talked about this verse in a long time, but I just love this verse. This verse is so simple. It's so profound. And what you have to do is imagine that Peter and James and John are laying on the ground. They're laying on the ground with their face on the ground. They are worshiping God. Now listen to what the Bible says. In verse 7 it says, "Then Jesus came over to them and touched them." So Jesus would have had to get down like this. And he says, "Hey." Then listen to what he says. He says, "Get up. Don't be afraid." Jesus comes down to them. Jesus makes his way to them. They were still face first in the ground. They didn't even know Jesus was there. Jesus comes and he puts his hand on them and he says, "Get up. Don't be afraid." We it goes like this, we can fix mistakes. If you've messed up, that can be fixed. If you've made a mistake, you can get a second chance. If you made another mistake, you can get a third chance. But you can never make a shot that you don't take. You just can't do it. We can, as people, sacrifice the growth and progress that we have at this altar of just being safe and secure inside of our box. Now, I coach a soccer team, and many of you know this, and I haven't told any soccer stories this year because we haven't won a game yet, and they're not terribly interesting if we don't win. But yesterday morning, we were playing in Springfield, and we actually ahead 1-0 at halftime. It was really cool, and I got the kids down, and I said, "Hey, you guys can do this. You're playing, you're dominating the game. I mean, you're a lot closer to being ahead 3-0 than it's being tied 1-1." And I said, "You guys got to believe you can go out and do it." And for about 20 minutes of the second half, the halves are 35 minutes. They did it, and then all of a sudden, the other team, they just had this incredible goal. I mean, we couldn't have stopped it. A really good team couldn't have stopped it. And then we had the ball on their end, and they got a fast break, and they scored. They're ahead 2-1 at this time. There's 7 minutes left. Now, what I told the kids, in not so many words, from far away, is get up. Don't be afraid. When things are down in life and they're not going your way and you've suffered a setback, get up. Don't be afraid. It was really cool. I moved one of the defenders back up to forward, and I had never seen these kids play that. It was the best that one of my teams has ever played the last 7 minutes. I mean, these kids were running around this soccer field like worker bees in a hive. It was an amazing thing. Now, it doesn't matter if they won or lost. These kids just absolutely gave it everything they had the last 7 minutes. For those of you who want to know if they won or lost, you can see me afterward. For those of you who don't know, we actually did come back and win 3-2. It's really cool. But I don't care about the final score. Actually, I do like winning, but but what happened is these kids got up, and they weren't afraid. I don't care if none of these kids are ever going to play soccer, and probably in high school, college for sure. They're never going to play in the World Cup. But I hope that lesson that they learned, they get up, don't be afraid. We got, maybe in your faith life, maybe some of you just, okay, maybe I'm coming here for a while, There's been a few times that have been really cool, and I've grown some, but I kind of went back here and, okay, if that's you, get up. Don't be afraid. Jesus is reaching, get up, don't be afraid. Yeah, maybe it didn't work out perfectly the first time, but get up, don't be afraid. You know, we have this morning 12 people running the Lincoln Marathon, the full 26 miles. You know, probably another couple dozen people that are doing the half marathon this morning. But especially for the marathoners, I've kind of talked to most of them throughout the time, and they battled cold, they battled injuries, they battled like just this rotten winter and spring and stuff like that, and so many times they've just had to hear these words, get up, don't be afraid. Now, some of them are actually probably, it's 4 hours into the race right now. Some of them are like the 23-mile mark, and I hope they can hear these words, get up, don't be afraid, don't quit. You're so close, get up, don't fear, don't be afraid. I'll say one more, like, if you got an unfulfilled dream, if you got a goal you haven't quite reached, if fear, if worry, if anxiety has gotten the best of you, if there's a person in your life that you just really feel compelled to share your faith with, if there's someone out there that you just really feel like you need to serve or love, if there's some type of mission, if there's some type of activity, if God is calling you to do a certain thing at a certain time at a certain place, get up. Don't be afraid. Now, here in verse 8 we conclude, and when they looked up, so they're still on the ground at this point, Jesus comes down and he says, get up, don't be afraid. They looked up, and guess what they saw? It says, when they looked up, Moses and Elijah, they were gone, but they only saw Jesus. Now, what we need to know is these two things. Number one is that the longer we live in him, the greater he becomes in us. So the longer that we live in him, the greater that he becomes in us. And the greater that he becomes in us, the smaller our fears become. The size of our fears is going to be an inverse correlation to the size of our God. The bigger our fears, the smaller our God. The bigger our God, the smaller our fears.